Hey there. Welcome to the MongoDB Podcast Live. I'm so excited to have you join us. Today's a special day. We are launching a new series. It's going to be called VC Spotlight, and I'm so excited to kick this series off. We've got some special things in store for the series, and today we're going to have a great chat with a venture capitalist, and we're going to chat also with someone else from MongoDB who's going to be joining me for the VC Spotlight series, Suraj Patel. We're going to bring him on in just a moment. I'm going to give it a few moments for people to join. I'd like you to think about your questions you might have for our guest today, Pete Soderling. We're going to go into Pete's background. We're going to talk about data council and how he's setting out to help 1,000 developers start companies and in their mission to build startups. So we're going to get to that shortly. And all right, we've got some people piling in. Great to see you. As you're coming in, let me know where you're from. I'm starting this broadcast from the East Coast of the United States. I'm just right next to the ocean. I can reach out and touch it. I'm in Ocean City, New Jersey. I'm excited to hear where y'all are coming in from and what your primary interests are around venture capital. Are you a VC yourself? Are you a startup founder, perhaps? And we'll start thinking about your questions. But let me know where you're from. Cincinnati. Awesome. Great. Well, welcome to the stream. Spain. I always like to try and figure out who's the furthest from me at this point. India, welcome. Odessa, Ukraine. All right. New York, right around the corner. Speaking of New York, I want to mention that MongoDB user groups are back. MongoDB user groups are where the community comes together. We talk about MongoDB. We learn together and we network. And I'm going to be hosting a MongoDB user group in New York City on March 2nd. We're going to start after work, 5:30 p.m. We'll have some good food, some good drinks, and good conversation. We'll also be hearing from Anaya Raising. I'm going to butcher her last name. Anaya, our newest developer advocate, and she's going to be doing some technical presentations along with myself. We're going to talk primarily about migration from RDBMS to NoSQL. If you're interested, I'm going to place a link in the show shortly, so stay tuned for that. And if you're listening to this as a rebroadcast on the podcast, thanks for tuning in. Check the show notes for links and resources and all of the things that we talk about. We're going to detail those in links. Let's get to the show. We've got quite a few people piling in. Kenya, welcome. Hello, Nilesh. Greetings, Chandan. Rio de Janeiro, fantastic. Great. We're getting a lot of people from all over the world. I love that. So when I started MongoDB, I started as a solutions architect, and I was working hand in hand with our account executives to help talk about the benefits of MongoDB and help drive the sales process. And in doing so, I learned and really enriched my love for teaching and helping others. And that led me to work in developer advocacy. And from there, I started to work on the MongoDB for Startups program. And that got me interested in these early stage startups, folks that are building companies, founders with great ideas. They need access to technology. They need access to technical experts. And that's where MongoDB for Startups came. And I was really grateful to have a hand in helping launch that. And that's grown and it's become very successful. We've helped so many startups. The next evolution of that is around venture capital. And my next guest, I'm going to bring in right now. Welcome, Suraj.
Hey, Michael.
We've got a new program at MongoDB, and you're heading it up. Why don't you tell people a little bit about MongoDB Ventures?
Yeah, absolutely. MongoDB Ventures, we launched it mid last year. The idea is to back founders that are solving problems for developers and other data practitioners. We're focused on investing at the early stage. So for us, that means seed through Series B primarily.
Okay, fantastic. And I understand we've had some early investments already. Do you want to talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, absolutely. Few from the portfolio. One is Payload CMS. It was out of the last YC batch. They're a headless CMS company, TypeScript, developer first, open source platform. We're super excited. They happen to be using MongoDB on the back end. Also invested in a company out of Europe called Gitpod. Gitpod is creating remote developer environments so that developers can save time, don't have to spend a lot of time setting up their dev machines, can just log in, connect their IDE to Gitpod, and it spins up an ephemeral machine in the background, and you can just start coding.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, we're going to have Gitpod on the podcast very soon. Stay tuned for
Awesome.
that. Yeah. Suraj, this is the first in a series we're going to do. We're going to do a number of conversations with folks in the VC community. And I'm curious about your background. You're a venture capitalist yourself. You want to tell a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So most of my career I've spent working in data in some form or fashion. Before becoming an investor, I was at Looker and Tipco Software. Then I spent 6 years investing at an institutional fund focused on ML tooling. So made investments in companies like Hardex, which is an open source data labeling company, Bento ML, which is a model inference serving infrastructure play, as well as applied AI. So Ambi Robotics, for example, which is a robotic parcel sortation product, as well as Lars AI, which is using AI to help with chat support, popular topic these days. Yeah.
Great. Well, I want to encourage folks that are watching or listening to check out. We have a blog article explaining the launch of MongoDB Ventures. You can visit mdb.link/VC blog to get more details about the launch of MongoDB Ventures. Now, Suraj, I understand our guest today is Pete Soderling, Data Counsel. I understand you knew him prior to planning the stream today. How did you meet Pete?
I met Pete through a mutual friend who was we call him Looker's business co-founder, Keenan Rice, great guy. Pete, but in general, Pete has been around the data ecosystem for a very long time. I had the opportunity to attend his larger event, Data Council, last March in Austin, Texas. Amazing event, all around the modern data stack and ML tooling. So Pete's doing wonderful things for the data community, and so I was excited to hear he was going to be on the podcast.
Well, let's without further ado, let's bring Pete into the stream. Pete, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show. Excuse me. So Pete, tell us a little bit about yourself. Give the folks that are watching and listening a little bit of background about yourself.
Sure, sounds good. I'm an engineer, first and foremost. I often say from the first internet bubble in the late 90s. And I went to NYU, so I started my career on the East Coast. Was a software engineer there in New York City, and kind of got this itch to do something that I felt was a little broader versus working for a typical company. So in 2003, I left my job and started my first company, and that sort of put me on the road to being an engineer founder, and the many experiences I've had from there.
Yeah, fantastic. And how did Data Council come to be?
Well, Data Council was essentially pivoted out of my third startup. I had started two companies in New York City before 2010, and then I ended up moving to San Francisco and starting two companies in SF after 2010. And originally, when I moved to SF, I thought that I wanted to start a social network for software engineers. So I found the smartest leader type engineers that I could find. They happened to be VPs from LinkedIn and Salesforce and Pinterest, because I sort of wanted these VP level engineers to both sanction what I was doing, to help me with their networks, and also to see if they were interested in angel investing. And so I sort of found all three of those things from this group of folks. And so I raised some angel money to start a social network to help software engineers connect with each other around shared technical challenges. And sort of lofty ambition, great idea. I still think the world needs something like that. But of course, us engineers are not always the most social creatures. And so it was a little bit like pushing a rock up a hill. But in the end, the social network, it had some growth, but not enough growth to sort of justify future rounds of funding. But we had built a great community around it. And one of the niche verticals that we had sort of looked at in order to build community around the social network to get users onto our platform was data engineering. And data engineering was really barely a thing in 2013, when it was 2012 and 13 when I was working on this project. But I was convinced, just sort of based on my experience as a technologist, that the world needed to really understand and embrace data eng more, because basically what was happening at the time was everyone was talking about the sexy quanti data sciencey stuff, and instead was sort of ignoring the subterranean layer of data engineering that was required to put all the pieces together. So yeah, so that was sort of the inception of the idea behind Data Council. It started as a meetup first. We called it the Data Engineering Meetup, and we launched one in San Francisco and one in New York City. And pretty soon it took off with the community, and we turned it into a conference a couple years later.
Hmm. That's fantastic. That's great. And Suraj, you have a very similar background to Pete, so I'll kind of seed questions to you as they come to you.
Yeah, I was going to say, Pete, maybe talk a little bit about the community beyond, is it mostly meetups and the conference? Are there other aspects of the community and other ways that people are interacting today?
Yeah, so because I sort of pivoted a company, a failed startup, into Data Council. Data Council essentially was a lifestyle business for me, and at least in the early days. And so, actually making revenues was important, and this is something, various startup founders in the last 10 or 12 years maybe haven't had to deal with, because there's sort of been ample capital around. In this particular phase of my life, like Data Council, it was important that it made money, and so it started off as a for-profit event, obviously with a very deep community brand. But we did meetups. We expanded our meetup footprint. Then we started to expand the conference footprint around the world. And so by 2019, we were running 4 conferences around the world: one in SF, one in New York
Very cool.
City, one in Barcelona, and one in Singapore. And then we had maybe 20 or so, 20 plus satellite meetups in different cities between the US and Europe, that ultimately sort of drove traffic into the main events, because we never wanted to monetize meetups. We felt like that was a little bit tacky. But we would sort of drive people to the main conferences where, we would sell tickets and have sponsorships. And that was sort of what kept the community afloat for a long time from a revenue perspective. So largely Data Council has been comprised of meetups. Then the conference, which is now one main conference in Austin. We sort of shrunk the footprint post-COVID to focus on the US market. And then a bunch of content, because we publish all the videos for free online. So there's a deep YouTube channel of 8+ years of data engineering and data science content that folks can find on YouTube. So those are the main aspects of the way
Yeah.
Data Council works. We never really did a big push into the digital community, because so much of our stuff was built on IRL, and that kind of became our brand. So that's how we've structured it so far.
Very cool. And then I can't remember when you launched Data Community Fund, but maybe tell us the story of why you decided to launch Data Community Fund and move into that direction.
Yeah, so as we were running Data Council over the years, there were baby companies, baby Datadog and baby Snowflake and baby DBT, that were all at Data Council, and some of those, we saw sort of we were there during the years that DBT went from Fishtown Analytics to actually become DBT, and they participated in Data Council, all along the way. So once I saw this pattern, continue to occur, and then I saw the opportunities that these companies had on the other side to become big, meaningful infrastructure or data tooling companies, I realized that the next batch of these great companies was surely under my nose already. And so, at the same time, I wanted to sort of give back this engineer founder, these crazy learnings that I had had in starting 4 companies. And so I started to advise the engineers in the community around their nascent startups. And one thing led to another. That led to angel investing, which led to sort of getting larger allocations in their investment rounds because they wanted someone like Data Council and myself to help them and help them find customers or help them hire. They saw the power of our network. So one thing led to another, and those allocations started to increase. And eventually, I raised a venture fund in 2020, and a bunch of the funds in the Bay Area who had sort of noted also what was going on in Data Council, Sequoia, and Foundation Capital and Bain, they all sort of jumped in on the small fund that I started in 2020.
Very cool.
And if I could jump in, so tell us about your mission. I understand you've made a fairly bold mission to help. Is it 1,000 developers?
So I used to say 1,000, and then probably I used to say my goal is to help 1,000 engineers start companies, and probably over the pandemic, 300+ of them found me, and on Zoom calls because they heard that Pete, the founder of Data Council, was doing investing, and so many of the B2B data companies found me, and I was able to obviously not invest in all of them, but hopefully offer nuggets of wisdom to most of them. So I actually decided to up my goal to 10,000, help 10,000 engineers start companies, because it just felt like 1,000 was a little bit too achievable.
Maybe a good segue. Pete, do you think now is a good time for maybe the developers in the audience to think about starting a company? Obviously, markets have been choppy. What are you seeing at the seed stage?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think there's two different kinds of founders. There's first-time founders, and then there's founders who have started something before. And I didn't realize when I started my career and my founder career in 2003 that I would end up starting 4 companies. And I thought the first one was all that I was focused on, and it was all that I could stomach, and it was all that I cared about, and that was sort of the extent of my vision. I didn't really realize that founding could become a bit of a discipline. And I think it depends obviously on the risk profile of the person and lots of things. So I do think that situationally, in these markets, when your company stock is down and you might not be inspired as the future of world domination at your tech company, as you felt a year ago or 2 years ago. I get that could shake free some opportunities and some people who are ready to finally take the plunge and really go against the grain and start something. So I think that for sure, that will happen. And then I also think there's folks that, I've always been looking for the next company to start, maybe since they finished their last one. And whether or not the macroeconomic times matters as much to those folks or not, I don't know. But I do know that it is a great time to start a company. It's a great time to raise money from investors, because there's all this money on the sidelines. So overall, I couldn't be more bullish on the startup ecosystem, and I'd encourage engineers out there to think about starting something.
Yeah. Along those lines, are you seeing a lot of seed rounds get done?
Yeah, for sure. I'm talking to companies all day, all week. Most investors that I know are sort of the same mind. I think the valuations are a little, a little choppy, as you said. Maybe that's inside baseball for us investors. But yeah, I think that investors have appetite to invest in great founders, and as VCs always say, great companies will always get funded. And so I think this period that we're in will be absolutely no exception.
Well, can I ask you for advice to those that may be watching or listening that are thinking about starting something? They've got a great idea. What advice would you have for seeking that early, super early round?
Well, I think there's two things, two kinds of advice I would give to up and coming founders. One is that if you want to work in a startup, work in a startup, and what that means is startups always need help, and sometimes you might not be of the mind that you're exactly sort of fit or ready to start your own company from scratch. And honestly, I sort of wish that I had worked at a startup myself prior to starting companies. I was in New York City, kind of buried in New York City in the aughts, and hadn't made it up to SF yet. And the community in New York was not quite as helpful as it is now, especially for starting B2B startups. I think that there's a different pattern if you live in SF. like it's very smart to join a startup maybe before you think about starting your own startup. So baby steps, right? Like some people are used to corporate jobs and nice paychecks and the comforts. But sometimes, instead of just going cold turkey and jumping straight into the deep end, I think that joining a startup that you respect and some founders that you respect and working on a small team and really understanding all of the different hats you have to wear can be really helpful. So I think that's one thing. Sometimes there's an interstitial step that people might skip, and have the opportunity to pick up some life experience. So I guess that would be, some of my advice. And then in terms of raising money, for an early stage company, I think there's sort of a recognized pattern there too, right? Mostly you see folks who bootstrap or sort of use their own capital. Then they learn how to raise money from friends and family. Maybe then they tack on some angel money, and maybe then they learn how to raise from actual institutional VCs. And I think people are of the mind that people skip those steps all the time. They must just go straight to VCs and raise money. Well, sometimes that's the case, but sometimes there's this sort of incremental process that if you're really serious about founding a company or companies, to get good at sort of taking those steps in sequential order will save you a lot of pain from trying to sort of go to the top VCs first and get turned down more often than you'd like. So those are a couple tips that I've learned over the years from starting companies that I would advise to other founders.
And when a company does get to that VC stage, when they want to raise institutional capital, how would you advise them to think about who to partner with, which VC to choose? Hopefully, they're in a fortunate position where they have multiple options.
hmm Yeah, I mean, I think that everyone gets enamored with brands, and um, Sequoia is a great brand, or Andreessen, or whatever our perceptions are around the brands of VC funds. I think that smart founders learn quickly that funds are just composed of people, and the people, i.e., the person, the partner, essentially that invests in you around. You really need to vibe with that person and trust them and believe that they have specific concrete experience that can sort of benefit your company. So I think that that's far more important than the overall brand of the fund. And the other thing in this sort of current market is, especially for earlier stage companies, there's bespoke funds that are small funds that maybe you don't know about yet that are created specifically for you at your stage in a particular market. So, for instance, I launched the Data Community Fund. We only invest in B2B data companies. We have the power of the Data Council Network at our back. We only look at this space. We're very much 0 to 1. We don't do later stage investing, and so there's like bespoke. I think like understanding the orientation of the particular fund that you want to work with, and that's sort of right size for you at the right stage of your startup journey is critical.
Well, and Suraj, I mean, maybe speak a little bit about MongoDB Ventures. Is there a niche that you're looking to help?
Yeah, I think, as you know, Michael, at MongoDB, we are very persona focused. And so similarly, MongoDB Ventures, we're thinking a lot about our core persona, which is the application developer. And we want to back founders that are solving pain for application developers. And I think the traditional knock on corporate VCs is we promise the world, and it's always been tough to deliver because organizations, corporations are hard to navigate. So we have developed what we think is a very concrete playbook of how startups, once we've invested in them, can get value out of the MongoDB ecosystem. And part of that is getting them involved with you, Michael, and having them on the podcast. Part of that is making sure they're part of the Atlas ecosystem. And so we're really excited to engage with companies that are, in particular, looking for bottoms-up adoption as well, that can take advantage of the great developer community around MongoDB.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this or watching it and you want to get some more information, there's a link to the blog, which I'll put that up again, but you can also reach out to ventures@mongodb.com. That's you'll get that at some point, right, Suraj?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Great.
Maybe back to you, Pete, that super useful advice for founders as they're getting started. I'm curious, can you tell us a recent story of an investment you made, what got you so excited, and some of the companies you're looking at now?
Yeah, for sure. Maybe many people who follow the data space, data world, have seen a lot of buzz around DuckDB on Twitter.
Mhm.
It's a super interesting, it's kind of like a SQL Lite, but it's for analytics and analytical use cases, and it runs in memory. So I've been hearing about DuckDB from other portfolio companies like Hex, who were building sort of cool, pretty hardcore analytical experiences inside their products. And instead of like farming that data out to a ClickHouse or a Pinot or something else, they decided to sort of keep it in the product, and they were able to wrangle, through like really easy Python integrations, the DuckDB framework. And so I was hearing a lot about it, and I took the opportunity to track down the authors of the project. They were in Amsterdam, DuckDB Labs, and chatted with Hannes and the folks there, and found out that they were not as interested, perhaps, in commercializing it directly. But then I discovered that there was another organization being spun up called Mother Duck that was actually in partnership with them to commercialize that tool. And so I was able to meet the founder who came out of Google, Jordan, who had sort of been the chief architect on BigQuery at Google, had an amazing background. And I was fortunate enough to be able to make an investment in their seed round. So I'm quite excited about them. And they'll be speaking at the conference, Data Council in Austin. One of their engineers and their team will be there. So very excited to be able to support them.
Very cool. What about, do you have any unusual investment stories, something that maybe unfolded in a way that you didn't expect?
I guess the last couple of years have been so unusual. First of all, just meeting so many hundreds of founders over Zoom and making investment decisions over Zoom.
Mhm.
I had been an angel, before that, and had met a lot of folks IRL through Data Council. And I think, thank God, that I was able to start my investing career through that personal connection and that personal platform at Data Council, because I don't think I would have had the teeth that I had as an investor, if I had just tried to like hang a shingle and start angel investing or venture investing, during the pandemic. I don't think that magnetism and that brand would have been there with folks. So I think the IRL thing is really important. So a lot of my investing over the last 2 years has been through Zoom. I think one thing that a lot of engineers don't know, because I didn't understand this before I became a VC, is that VCs have to raise money too. And so, I had a very sort of interesting early check into my first fund where I had met someone online through AngelList, and he lived in Istanbul. And within a few months, I was sort of like sitting in his front yard on Bosphorus River in Istanbul. It turned out he was one of the prolific angel investors in Turkey. And when I told Hassan that I was thinking about starting a fund, he immediately committed, and so he was the very first check in the Data Community Fund. And I never expected that that would be from an investor in Turkey, of all places.
That's a really cool story. Um, maybe going back to DuckDB and Mother Duck. So embedded databases is a really interesting trend. We're also seeing more data computation going towards the edge. And then, of course, there's lots of trends around foundational models. I guess what technology trends are you most interested in, and where are you looking to make some new investments?
Yeah, I think you're definitely right. The foundation model space is very interesting. I because I'm a tool builder by nature. What I've discovered over the years is that the best engineers don't just engineer; they want to build their own tools. And so, sort of the thesis of the Data Community Fund is very much around tool builders in the B2B space, and that can be everything from the database layer, and up. But I think that especially with the LLMs, people think a lot of the work is done because it's sort of, let's say it raised the floor, 80% on what a mere mortal company with no data scientists can do quickly by talking to the model. I mean, that's totally accurate and correct, but there's still this 20% on top of the model that you can fine tune. And what fine tuning means is just another name for training. We're sort of training the model, to do specific things or to be smarter in a specific area. Plus, there's also the pre-processing of the inputs and the post-processing of the outputs in the model that also offers surface area. So I think of it as this like triangle sort of set of points with the LLM in the center, where IP can be created for new companies. And I think that there's a certain amount of tooling that can occur and needs to emerge to help companies really harness the power of the LLM. And some of this actually relates to what we've been seeing in the MLOps space, where MLOps is kind of this very complicated, like, there's the data prep and there's the data labeling, and then there's the training the model, and then there's a retraining the model, and then there's the monitoring the model. Well, think of all these things as sort of in the MLOps space. And in my opinion, some of this stuff is going to sort of be shrunk down onto the top of the LLM and manifest itself in this fine tuning loop, because fine tuning needs labeled data and training and retraining and monitoring and all these things. So I kind of feel like there's a manifestation of MLOps that will be sort of condensed down on top of the LLM, and I'm excited about what the new tooling around some of that in that space looks like in the future.
And I want to, as folks are watching and listening, think of your questions and feel free to put those in the comments. We're watching. We'll put them up. If you've got questions for Pete or for Suraj, keep those flowing, and we'll try and engage with the audience just a little bit. So go ahead.
Super helpful, Pete. I guess as a follow-up, one of the things that we're thinking a lot about, and I'm curious if you've seen that, is the foundational model opens up machine learning to a broader audience, and in particular, software developers that can now use the APIs that the foundational models provide. I'm curious if you've started to see a different type of persona that are looking to create ML-powered applications and or tooling around machine learning.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the early cases of this are the companies that harness the power of the LLM in maybe ways that we immediately didn't expect, like marketing copywriting, in the case of Jasper or Copy AI. But probably not surprising, but maybe even more interesting based on those two data points is that your mother might be talking to ChatGPT, because she heard about it on USA Today or whatever, right? Like, I mean, it's sort of like it's quickly hit that level of fervor pitch where even sort of ordinary, consumers, I mean, not to mention the kids that are pumping all their homework through ChatGPT to pass their college, essays. So it like there's really, I mean, it's amazing, like sort of zeitgeist moment where everyone's paying attention to it. I don't look so much personally at vertical SaaS or too many like verticalized applications that get far away from the core technical stack. So I'm not privy to consumer or other kinds of specific B2B use cases, like in volume. But I do know that the sort of nationwide or worldwide fascination with these tools is definitely here. So there's no question that's going to manifest itself in all kinds of amazing use cases that touch businesses and consumers alike.
We did get one question. I don't know if you're willing to field this one, Mohit, my colleague, actually. What is the right time or phase for a startup to raise funds? I feel raising money too early makes companies lose the focus on the product. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my take on this would be, it's really important that you, as a founder, that you solve a problem that you yourself have experienced in life. And it's not so much sort of searching for the right problem to solve, although some founders are very good at this and do this, but I think it has much more teeth if you are able to start a company based on a pain that you yourself personally have. A, because that gives you the unction to start quickly and to start to build a product early, maybe with your own time on the side, with your own money. And it also sort of protects you through the ups and downs of, what's sure to be a bumpy road with any startup. So I think that's that's a first step. And if you're able to do that, if you're an engineer, I think engineers have a lot of power in this situation because they themselves are able to sort of craft the early product early on, even without funding, and potentially even get a little traction. So if you can sort of prove to your future investor that A, you have pain around a particular product area, B, that you can be a quality engineer to create a product in the space, and C, that you have 2 or 3 or 5 people using that product, especially if it's a B2B solution, I mean, that's essentially a fundable company right there. But I think that some founders don't realize that, there's obviously a lot of work to get to that point. And so some people just want to quit their job and raise money immediately and not start building until they get the money. And, sometimes that hamstrings the startup because you may or may not be the kind of person that's just able to go and command enough respect to get that first check. So sometimes you have to take those 2 or 3 steps yourself and prove a little bit of traction before VCs will take you seriously, so to speak.
I'll maybe add in that I think the expectations with capital have changed over time as well. And it depends on what milestones you lay out when you're raising money. But maybe long ago, as soon as you raised money, there was an expectation of revenue. But I think venture capitalists, as they've been more excited by bottoms-up developer-led motion, go-to-market motions, they've been okay with companies focusing on product for a longer time, creating that groundswell. And so a good example, DBT Labs. They raised a lot of money, but I don't think they've lost any focus on product. And then there's lots of other examples, particularly in commercial open source companies that raise money well before they have a commercial product. And it's through the realization of great open source companies like Confluent, they benefited from Kafka being incubated within LinkedIn for a very long time. And so I think that there are capital providers willing to fund that product focus for some amount of time before they expect revenue.
Yeah, no question. I mean, I think if that would be another angle, right? For a founder is if they have something that can be open sourced, or if they're able to build an open source community around their open source, like that demonstrates traction as well. Even though, great point, it's not revenue traction, but there's definitely a whole category of VCs who will invest in. I mean, DuckDB is in that category, right? Like there's no commercial revenues in DuckDB, and they raised a seed, and then 4 months later, Andreessen Horowitz came in and gave them money for an A with zero commercial traction. So it's just purely based on the team and sort of the traction of the open source project and other things. So that's absolutely correct.
I'm curious, how long can a company like DuckDB, with no commercial footprint, so to speak, how long before you need to begin to pivot and show at least plans for converting and covering?
Well, I think this is a great one for Suraj because he is at this sort of inflection point of investing in, I think you said Series B maybe, or later-ish. So I think Suraj, there's a lot of companies in my world that come all the way from pre-seed through seed, sometimes through A, with no commercial revenue, and then they find Suraj and they ask Suraj this question.
I think a lot of it comes down to the amount of capital you want to raise and the valuation expectation you have. So if you are very purposeful about raising a modest amount of capital to continue to build out your open source traction, and then only once you have a commercial product that is in market and you're ready to scale your commercial traction, that's when you raise your $20 million plus round. And of course, there are exceptions, like, if like Mother Duck, the example Pete gave, they're right on that cusp. So raising the round they did, the timing is right, and now we'll see the go-to-market engine start to build. But it does come down a lot to valuation expectations, increasingly as the public markets have changed. And the total upside an investor can expect from a startup is drastically different than what they could have expected in 2021.
Hmm.
Mm.
Well, we do have a couple of other questions. We did cover this a bit. I do want to give you an opportunity to address it, though. Looking for some additional information about the mission of Data Council.
Great. Yeah, Data Council originally, as I mentioned, was centered around the data engineering world. But over the years, what we found was that the data scientists came to the meetups, and the data analysts came to the meetups, and the AI researchers came to the meetups, and everyone sort of wanted to better learn how to work with their counterparts at each layer of the stack, right? Because this data stack is nascent and emerging even still, and so what we found was that sort of embracing all the different professionals at all the different layers of the stack and teaching them how to work with each other and sort of what tools each of them was using was super helpful to them. So we don't claim to be the arbiter of any truth, but we got very good at creating a community of very smart people from many top tech companies, Airbnb and Uber and Google and others, who would come and sort of help each other understand the systems that they were building internally and how they were interacting with other players and partners on their mission. So that's become the mission of Data Council. It's a deeply technical conference. It's designed for data engineers, data scientists, data analysts, AI researchers, product managers in the space who are sort of weaponizing a lot of that stack to B2B benefit, sometimes consumer benefit. So Data Council is for technical people, and we have lots of startups who come to Data Council, lots of investors who come to Data Council. So the whole ecosystem has been sort of growing around this mission of helping companies be data oriented and to pick the best tools for the best jobs when it comes to building out their data infrastructure and their machine learning infrastructure as well.
Great. So I've got a link at the bottom, mdb.link/data council. That's going to link you to datacouncil.ai, and understand we've got tickets on sale.
Yes,
It's
our
happening
event
in
is
March.
our event is coming up in March. It's right around the corner. It's only 6 weeks away. Datacouncil.ai/Austin. We'll have 600 to 800 top people there from many of the open source projects that you use on a daily basis. DuckDB, Great Expectations, Dagster, Hex, Apache Hoodie, like many of the open source tools, DBT, likely. So it's a really great community if you want to sort of meet your open source or data engineering, data science heroes. This is a great place to do it. Some of the speakers that I'm particularly excited about, we have Lloyd Tabb from Google, who was the founder of Looker, and Lloyd's been kind of quietly working on Malloy, which is this drop-in replacement for SQL. If you can believe that someone would dare to try to replace SQL, Lloyd is the guy to do it. And so I don't think he's spoken, he's blogged a bit, but I don't know if he's given any talks about this publicly. So we're very excited to have Lloyd. He's going to be talking about Malloy and introducing us to that tech. JJ Reddit, who's the founder of RStudio, and other founders of many other companies will be at Data Council. So it's going to be a pretty special group.
Great. Well, check the link. If you're listening to this in post as a podcast, check the show notes for links. We're going to have all the links to the resources that we mentioned. All right. Suraj, any further questions for Pete?
No, although I saw one more from the audience, I think from Mahesh.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, let's take a look at this one. Thanks for organizing the event. Curious which field in data science still needs more innovation or, say, niche market within data science in your experience?
Interesting question. I mean, I'm not a data scientist per se, so I would defer to folks at Data Council, who will be participating to give expert advice on this. But I think overall, one thing that we're seeing a bit of is the models and the algos themselves become commoditized, and there's no better manifestation of this than the LLM, right? I mean, I think many of us, adjacent to data science for the last few years have been sort of predicting this, that it wasn't really about the quality of your algo. We sort of shifted focus to say, well, it's the quality of your training data. And this is why, Google or Facebook could be so lethal at these algos. It's like most of the algos are in papers and they're open sourced and they're sort of common knowledge among academics. it's the training data that becomes quite differentiated. And I think you sort of put those two things together and you get, OpenAI creating these amazing LLMs, which is sort of the fusing of both of those bits together. Now, that being said, once you get back into that fine tuning layer, there's still proprietary data that particular applications and companies can capture and then use to fine tune the LLM. And so we sort of get back to, well, data is actually the most important thing in data science. It's not the science, it's not the algos themselves as much as it's the data. And I think that the world will continue along this path, especially with the confirmation of the way the LLMs work, and yet the opportunity to continue to tweak them and fine tune them based on proprietary data going forward.
Great. Well, Mahesh, I hope that answers your question. Pete, it's been a great conversation. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience?
I'm really excited to have been here. Thank you for the opportunity. I hope everyone visits us at Data Council Austin. We have special startup tickets for people who are working in startups. And also, if any founders out there are interested in starting companies, the Data Community Fund that I founded particularly specializes in day zero engineer founders. So I'm excited to talk to any engineers out there who are starting companies, and happy to share liberally from my own personal experience of Hard Knocks and in starting several companies. So I hope people will feel free to reach out to me at any time.
Great. And I understand you're also a podcaster. Is that correct, Pete?
Well, I am. I have a podcast. It's called Zero Prime, and it's specifically the story of engineer founders who are on the earliest days of starting their companies. So, it's sort of the podcast that I created for myself if I had been a young founder, a young engineer founder back in the day. And so we feature stories with top founders who are building companies, like Alexi, the founder of Datadog, was recently a guest in the show. Who's a friend, and we started companies in New York together around the same time. He started Datadog and I started Data Council, and I think his stock price is a lot higher than mine, but he was gracious enough to come on the show, and he's an example of the types of engineer founders that we talk to on a weekly basis.
Great. Well, if you enjoyed this chat around venture capital, talking with VCs, check out Zero Prime. The link is in the show notes and on the screen now if you want to tap that. Suraj, anything else?
No, I want to thank Pete. I really enjoyed the conversation. And then reemphasize, we plan to make this a series of talks where we highlight, in particular, VCs that are backing companies at the infrastructure layer. So VCs that aren't afraid to go deep and really understand a more technical product and back them at the early stage. So I'm excited to have Pete and hopefully a series of other VCs that think in a very similar way.
Great. And I'll just add a plug for the MongoDB podcast. If you are a VC or would like to appear on the VC Spotlight series, send an email to podcast@mongodb.com. If you want to check out previous episodes of the podcast, you can find them at mongodb.com/podcast. It's available on all podcast networks. Gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining me today. It's been a great chat.
Thank you very much. It was fun.
Thanks.